The crystal ballroom of the Croft Grand Hotel was a universe of hushed perfection. Sunlight, filtered through 20-foot arched windows, caught the dust motes dancing in the air, turning them into miniature, fleeting diamonds. The clink of polished silverware against fine porcelain was a delicate symphony, a sound Ilara Vance had come to know as the rhythm of wealth. She moved between the tables with a practiced grace, her black uniform immaculate, her expression a carefully constructed mask of pleasant neutrality. To the patrons, she was a ghost in the machine, a pair of hands that refilled water glasses and cleared away finished plates, as much a part of the decor as the towering floral arrangements. This anonymity was a shield. 3 years ago, Ilara had been a name in the world of international corporate law. A rising star at a prestigious firm, she was the one they called for the impossible deals, the one who could navigate the labyrinthine nuances of cross-cultural contracts. Her fluency in Japanese, honed during a decade living in Tokyo, was her superpower. Then came the Akiyama merger, a deal worth billions. A single misplaced decimal point in a supplementary clause, inserted by a jealous senior partner who then framed her for the oversight. The fallout was catastrophic. She was disbarred, disgraced, and financially ruined. The world she had built turned to ash, and Ilara Vance, the legal prodigy, ceased to exist. In her place was just Ilara, a waitress at the Croft Grand, hiding in plain sight, paying off a mountain of debt, one meager tip at a time. The hotel itself was the domain of Julian Croft, a man who had inherited the empire from his father but possessed none of the old man's grace. Julian was a creature of sharp suits, sharper smiles, and a casual cruelty that he wielded like a scepter. He stalked the halls of his hotel not as a proprietor but as a predator, sniffing out weakness. His staff feared him, their smiles tightening whenever his polished Oxford shoes clicked into earshot. He saw them not as people, but as components, easily replaceable if they malfunctioned. Ilara had seen him fire a concierge for having a scuff on his shoe and a bellhop for failing to laugh at one of his tasteless jokes. She knew to make herself small, to be perfect, to be invisible. Her manager, Maria, was a good woman trapped in a bad system. She saw the quiet intelligence in Ilara's eyes, the unnatural precision in the way she organized her station. But she never asked questions. In the kingdom of Julian Croft, curiosity was a dangerous liability. "Just keep your head down, Ilara," she'd say during their shared, hurried breaks. "He's in a mood today." He was always in a mood. This week, however, the mood was different. It was a high-strung, electric tension that crackled through the entire hotel. Tanaka Global Holdings, a Japanese conglomerate of immense power and prestige, was considering a strategic partnership. This wasn't just a deal, it was a coronation for Julian. If he landed the Tanaka investment, it would solidify his position, silencing the board members who still whispered that he was just his father's lucky son. The CEO, the legendary Mr. Kenji Tanaka himself, was flying in with his delegation. For a week, the hotel had been turned upside down in preparation. Julian had been a storm of furious demands, his voice echoing in the marble lobby, dissecting every detail from the thread count of the sheets in the penthouse suite to the specific vintage of the wine to be served. Everything must be flawless, he had snarled at the assembled staff, his eyes sweeping over them with contempt. "I want them to see the pinnacle of Western hospitality. Any mistake, any single slip-up, will be dealt with severely. Do you understand me?" A chorus of timid "Yes, Mr. Crofts" followed. Ilara stood at the back, her hands clasped behind her, her face impassive. She understood better than anyone. She had once sat on the other side of tables like these, watching men like Julian Croft preen and posture. She knew the language of power, and she knew the man standing before her was a pretender. On the day of the final meeting, Maria approached Ilara, her face pale with anxiety. "Julian wants the best," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He specifically requested you to serve the private dining room. He said you're the only one who doesn't look like you're about to burst into tears when he enters a room." Ilara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. To be noticed by Julian Croft was to be placed in the path of a hurricane. But refusing was not an option. "Of course, Maria," she said, her voice steady. She prepared the room with meticulous care. The long mahogany table was polished to a mirror shine. Each crystal glass was free of the slightest smudge, each piece of silver aligned with geometric precision. She was just placing the leather-bound water pitcher on the sideboard when Julian Croft swept in, flanked by his lawyer, a nervous, ferret-like man named Gregory Finch. "Is everything ready?" Croft demanded, not looking at her. "Yes, Mr. Croft. Everything is in order." He ran a finger along the table, checking for dust. Finding none, he grunted, a sound of reluctant approval. "Tanaka is a traditionalist. Remember that. Bow slightly when they enter. Don't speak unless spoken to. Be efficient, be silent, be invisible. Can your simple mind handle that?" "Yes, Mr. Croft," Elara said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The insult, casual and dismissive, was a familiar sting. It was the voice of the world that had cast her out, the voice that told her she was nothing. She pushed the feeling down, locking it away. Today she was just a waitress. That was all she could be. The arrival of Mr. Tanaka and his two associates was a study in quiet dignity. They were older men, dressed in conservative, impeccably tailored suits. Mr. Tanaka, a man in his late 60s with a calm, watchful face and silver-streaked hair, moved with an unhurried grace that made Julian Croft's frantic energy seem boorish by comparison. Elara performed the slight, respectful bow as they entered, her movements fluid and correct. She caught Mr. Tanaka's eye for a fraction of a second and saw not the dismissal she expected, but a flicker of mild, intelligent curiosity. Then it was gone. The meeting began. Elara moved around the room like a phantom, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the thick Persian rug. She poured water, her hand steady, the stream silent as it filled the glasses. She served the first course, placing each plate down without a whisper. Her focus was absolute, her world reduced to the four corners of this room. Julian was in his element, his voice a smooth, confident baritone as he walked the Japanese delegation through a slick presentation. His lawyer, Finch, chimed in with legal jargon, looking pleased with himself. Elara could understand most of the conversation. The Japanese executives spoke to each other in their native tongue, their comments brief and analytical. They were impressed by the hotel's revenue projections, but had subtle concerns about market volatility. She filed the information away, a habit from a past life she couldn't break. The main course was served, and the conversation shifted to the finer points of the contract, a thick document that sat in the center of the table. Julian was explaining a key clause related to asset management. "As you can see," he said, gesturing grandly, "the Croft Corporation will assume full operational control, ensuring seamless integration and maximizing profitability for our new partners." It was then that the universe decided to conspire against her. As she leaned in to refill Mr. Tanaka's water glass, one of the Japanese associates shifted his chair back unexpectedly. His elbow jostled hers. It was a tiny, fractional movement, but it was enough. A few drops of ice-cold water, no more than a teaspoon's worth, spilled from the pitcher, landing on the glossy cover of the contract binder. The silence in the room was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the air out. Elara froze, the silver pitcher still in her hand. The water beaded on the leather, a tiny glistening transgression. Julian Croft's face, which had been a mask of charming salesmanship, contorted into a snarl of pure fury. His eyes, cold and blue, locked onto Elara. The transformation was terrifying. "You clumsy, incompetent fool," he hissed, his voice low and venomous, yet carrying to every corner of the silent room. "What is wrong with you? Can you not perform the simplest task without making a mess of it?" Elara felt the blood drain from her face. "My sincerest apologies, Mr. Croft, sir. It was an accident." "An accident?" He spat the word. He snatched a napkin and furiously dabbed at the harmless drops of water. "I am trying to close the most important deal of my life, and I am surrounded by idiots. Do you have any idea how much is at stake? Of course you don't. The thoughts in that empty head of yours probably don't extend beyond what time your shift ends." He wasn't just angry, he was performing. He was trying to show the Japanese investors that he was a man of high standards, a man who did not tolerate imperfection. But the cruelty was real, raw, and ugly. He turned to Mr. Tanaka, forcing a tight, apologetic smile. "My deepest apologies for this. Interruption. It is so difficult to find good help these days. She is, without a doubt, the stupidest waitress we have. The insult hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. Stupidest waitress. He had said it in English, directly to her, but for the benefit of his guests. He was using her humiliation as a tool. Ilara stood ramrod straight, her eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The shame was a physical thing, a hot wave that washed over her from head to toe. She felt the eyes of everyone in the room on her, the two Japanese associates, the smirking lawyer, and Mr. Tanaka. Mr. Tanaka's expression was unreadable. He simply inclined his head slightly, a gesture that could have meant anything. He then picked up his own napkin and gently blotted the spot on the binder, his movements calm and deliberate. "Please, do not concern yourself, Croft-san," he said in heavily accented but precise English. "It is merely water. It will dry." His voice was quiet, yet it cut through Julian's tirade like a razor. There was an icy disapproval in his tone that was far more damning than any outburst. Julian, perhaps sensing he had gone too far, tried to recover. "Of course, Tanaka-san, you are too gracious." He then glared at Ilara. "Get out," he mouthed silently, his face a mask of contempt. "You're fired." With as much dignity as she could muster, Ilara gave a small, stiff bow to the table and turned. As she walked toward the door, her legs trembling, she felt the burn of humiliation on the back of her neck. She had been invisible, and now she had been seen, only to be branded as a fool and cast out. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, leaving her alone in the silent, empty hallway, the sound of her own ragged breathing loud in her ears. Ilara didn't go to the staff locker room to collect her things. She couldn't face the pitying or curious glances of her co-workers. Instead, she found a small, secluded alcove near the service elevators, a place where discarded linen carts were sometimes kept. She sank onto a cold, tiled floor, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to control the tremors that racked her body. The public humiliation was a fresh wound, layered over old scars. It wasn't just about being fired from a job she desperately needed. It was the brutal, casual way Julian Croft had stripped her of her dignity, reducing her to a caricature of incompetence in front of men she would have once met as an equal. The word stupid echoed in her mind, a cruel brand. She stayed there for what felt like an hour, listening to the distant hum of the hotel. The anger came slowly at first, a small, hot ember in the pit of her stomach, gradually growing until it burned away the shame. He had no right. He, a man who had been handed everything, had no right to shatter someone who was fighting to survive. Eventually, the sounds of the meeting concluding drifted down the hall, the scraping of chairs, the murmur of polite farewells. She knew she had to leave before she was discovered. Her plan was to wait until the executives were gone and then slip out a side entrance. Maria would have her final paycheck sent to her. It was over. She heard the door to the private dining room open. Peeking around the corner, she saw Julian Croft shaking hands with Mr. Tanaka, his face once again plastered with a confident, winning smile. The Japanese delegation departed, their footsteps receding down the main corridor. Croft and his lawyer, Finch, lingered for a moment, clapping each other on the back. "We nailed it, Gregory," Croft crowed, his voice filled with smug triumph. They barely even glanced at the revised asset clause. "They're signing tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. sharp." "Your performance was masterful, Julian," Finch said, his voice oozing sycophancy. "Putting that waitress in her place showed them you're a man who commands respect." Their laughter echoed in the hall as they walked away in the opposite direction. Ilara waited until their footsteps faded completely. Now was her chance to retrieve her personal effects from the service sideboard in the dining room. A small notebook and a pen she always carried. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She pushed the door open and slipped back into the opulent prison where she had been so thoroughly humiliated. The room was empty, bearing the remnants of the meal. The air was thick with the smell of expensive food and lingering cologne. Her eyes immediately fell to the center of the table. There, left behind in their haste, was the contract, the very binder she had spilled water on. A strange compulsion took hold of her. It was the instinct of her former life, the ingrained habit of a lawyer who lived and breathed the fine print. She walked to the table, her fingers tracing the embossed logo of Tanaka Global Holdings. The spot where the water had spilled was already dry, leaving no mark. She opened the binder. The document was thick, one side printed in English, the other in Japanese. Her eyes scanned the English text first, her mind automatically dissecting the dense legalese. She found the revised asset clause Croft had mentioned. It was aggressive, heavily skewed in his favor, but not strictly illegal. Standard hardball tactics. Then her gaze shifted to the adjacent page, to the Japanese translation. She read the first paragraph, then the second. A small frown creased her forehead. Something was off. The translation was clumsy, stilted. It lacked the precise formal language essential for a Japanese legal document. It read as if it had been put through a cheap online translation program rather than drafted by a professional. Finch, for all his preening, was clearly out of his depth. Then she saw it. It was in the fourth subsection of the Asset Management Clause. A single character, a tiny, almost unnoticeable difference in a complex kanji compound. In the English version, the clause stated that in the event of a market downturn below a certain threshold, the Croft Corporation would have the option to purchase a controlling interest in the joint venture's assets. A fail-safe for Croft, but one Tanaka's team would have surely negotiated. But the Japanese translation said something entirely different. The character used was not the one for option, shuanzei kwan, sentakuken. The character used, subtly different by a few strokes, was the one for obligation, yi wu gimu, and the sentence structure around it was cleverly, maliciously twisted. It didn't say that Croft had the option to buy. It stated that Tanaka Global Holdings had the obligation to sell their controlling interest to Croft for a predetermined, insultingly low price if the market dipped. It wasn't a mistake. A chill snaked down Ilara's spine. This was not incompetence, this was fraud on a breathtaking scale. It was a poison pill, a corporate time bomb hidden in plain sight, disguised by a supposed translation error. Croft wasn't just negotiating a partnership, he was engineering a hostile takeover, planning to use the slightest market tremor to seize a billion-dollar portfolio for pennies on the dollar. He was counting on the Japanese team to trust the English version and their own legal team's initial review, assuming the translation was a direct, faithful copy. The final signing would be on the bilingual document, making the Japanese text just as legally binding. She felt the blood pounding in her ears. Julian Croft hadn't just insulted her, he was trying to swindle a man who had, in his own quiet way, shown her a moment of grace. He had called her stupid, while he was perpetrating an act of such audacious criminal arrogance. She stood there in the silent room, the damning document in her hands. Her past life and her present one had just collided with the force of a tectonic shift. The disgraced lawyer and the fired waitress were staring at the same page, and they both knew this was more than just a piece of paper. It was a weapon. And for the first time in 3 years, Ilara Vance felt a flicker of the power she thought she had lost forever. The question was, what was she going to do with it? The weight of the discovery pressed down on Ilara, a physical burden. For 3 years, her singular goal had been survival. To remain unnoticed, to pay her bills, to slowly, painstakingly rebuild a life from the rubble of her old one. Intervening now meant throwing herself back into the fire. Julian Croft was not just a bully, he was a powerful, vindictive man. If she tried to expose him and failed, he would crush her. He would use his wealth and connections to ensure she never worked in this city again. Not even as a waitress. He could dredge up her past, paint her as a disgruntled, disgraced lawyer with a vendetta. Who would believe a fired waitress over the CEO of the Croft Grand? She paced the length of the empty dining room, the contract clutched in her hand. Her mind, dormant for so long, was now racing, analyzing angles, calculating risks, formulating strategies. It was a familiar, exhilarating, and terrifying feeling. This was who she used to be. Ignoring it was the safe option. She could put the binder back on the table, walk out of the hotel, and never look back. She could let Croft get away with it. Let him swindle Mr. Tanaka. It wasn't her fight. She had fought for justice once before, and it had cost her everything. The system had protected the powerful and sacrificed her. Why should this time be any different? She stopped in front of the large window, looking down at the city lights twinkling to life as dusk settled. She saw the reflection of a tired woman in a waitress uniform, her face pale with conflict. But behind that reflection, she remembered the look on Mr. Tanaka's face. He hadn't smirked like Finch or glared like Croft. He had met her eyes, and in that brief moment, he had seen a person. His quiet, "It is merely water," was not just a dismissal of the spill, it was a rebuke of Croft's cruelty. It was a small act of decency in a moment of profound humiliation. And then there was the insult itself. Stupidest waitress. The words had lodged deep inside her, a shard of glass. Croft's entire worldview was built on the idea that people like her were insignificant, unintelligent, disposable. Proving him wrong was a dangerous, seductive thought. It wasn't just about justice for Mr. Tanaka, it was about reclaiming her own identity. It was about proving, if only to herself, that she was not the person Julian Croft thought she was. She was not the person the world had decided she was. Her decision solidified. It wasn't a choice anymore, it was a necessity. She couldn't let it stand. But how? She couldn't just walk up to Mr. Tanaka in the hotel lobby and accuse the CEO of fraud. She had no credibility. She needed a plan, something subtle and precise. She needed leverage. Her first move was to secure the evidence. Using her phone, she took clear, high-resolution photographs of the English page of the asset clause and the corresponding Japanese page. She zoomed in on the critical characters, ensuring the fraudulent translation was undeniable. She emailed the photos to a secure, anonymous account she had created years ago, a digital dead drop from her former life. Then she carefully placed the contract binder back in the exact center of the table, leaving no trace she had ever touched it. Next, she needed an ally, however unwilling. She thought of Maria. Her manager was timid and terrified of Croft, but she was also a fundamentally decent person. She had always treated Ilara with kindness. It was a long shot, but Maria was her only potential link to the inside. She found Maria in her small, cluttered office, inputting payroll data. Her face was etched with worry. When she saw Ilara, she jumped up. "Ilara, I'm so sorry about what happened. He had no right. I've already processed your severance. Maria, I don't have time," Ilara interrupted, her voice low and urgent. She closed the office door, creating a bubble of privacy. "I need your help. Something is very wrong with the Tanaka deal." Maria's eyes widened in fear. "What are you talking about? Don't get involved. Just go, Ilara. It's not worth it." "Julian Croft is a criminal," Ilara said, the words stark and clear. She took a deep breath and explained quickly and precisely what she had found in the contract. She didn't use complex legal terms, but focused on the core of the deception. The deliberate, malicious mistranslation designed to steal from the Japanese investors. As she spoke, Maria's face went from pale to ashen. She sank into her chair, her hands trembling. "I don't believe it. No, I can't. If he found out we were talking about this—" "He won't," Ilara insisted. "I don't need you to confront him. I just need one piece of information. Where is Mr. Tanaka staying?" "The presidential suite, floor 25, Maria whispered, her eyes darting toward the door as if Croft himself might burst through. "But you can't go up there. Security won't let you pass the elevators without a keycard for that floor." "I don't need to get to his room," Ilara said, her mind already working. "I just need to know where he is. I need to create an opportunity." She knew from her time at the hotel that high-profile guests like Mr. Tanaka were often accompanied by a personal assistant or translator who handled their affairs. That was her target. "Maria, all I need from you is to look the other way. I'm going to do this with or without your help, but if you could help me, it would make it easier." She looked her manager in the eye. "He called me stupid. He thinks we're all just ants for him to step on. Are you going to let him be right?" Maria stared at Ilara, a fierce internal battle playing out across her features. She thought of all the times she had swallowed her pride, all the casual insults she had endured, all the good employees she had seen chewed up and spat out by Julian Croft. A spark of defiance finally ignited in her eyes. "The Tanaka delegation has a private breakfast scheduled for 7 a.m. tomorrow in the Sakura Garden on the mezzanine level," Maria said, her voice barely audible but firm. "It's a secluded area. Croft won't be there." He thinks the deal is done. Mr. Tanaka's personal translator, a younger man named Kaito Sato, usually arrives 15 minutes early to check the arrangements. It was perfect, more than she could have hoped for. Thank you, Maria, Elara said, a wave of gratitude washing over her. Be careful, Elara, Maria whispered. He's a monster. I know, Elara replied, a grim determination hardening her features. Monsters need to be caged. She slipped out of the office, her waitress uniform no longer feeling like a costume of shame, but a cloak of invisibility. The hunt had begun. The next morning, Elara rose before dawn. She shed her uniform, the symbol of her servitude, and dressed in the only piece of her old life she had kept. A simple, elegant, dark grey business suit. It was 3 years out of style, but it was well made and fit her perfectly. She styled her hair not in the severe bun required by the hotel, but let it fall professionally around her shoulders. Looking at her reflection, she saw a ghost of the woman she used to be, confident, sharp, and formidable. The waitress was gone. Elara Vance, the lawyer, was back. She arrived at the Croft Grand at 6:30 a.m., entering through the main lobby. The morning staff, busy with their duties, barely gave her a second glance. She was just another corporate guest. She took the public elevator to the mezzanine and found the Sakura Garden. It was a beautiful, tranquil space, an indoor Japanese garden complete with a small koi pond, bamboo fountains, and bonsai trees. A single table was set for breakfast. As Maria had predicted, it was completely empty. Elara found a secluded bench behind a large potted maple tree, a spot that gave her a clear view of the entrance without being conspicuous. She sat, calmed her breathing, and waited. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. Doubt began to creep in. What if Maria was wrong? What if the translator didn't come early? What if her entire plan hinged on a faulty piece of intelligence? At exactly 6:45 a.m., a young Japanese man in a sharp suit walked into the garden. He was holding a tablet and speaking quietly into a headset. Kaito Sato. He began inspecting the table setting, checking the menu, and making a quiet call, likely to the kitchen. This was her moment. Elara stood up and walked toward him, her steps measured and confident. She held a small black leather-bound notebook, the one she had retrieved from the dining room. It looked professional, official. Sato-san, she said, her Japanese accent perfect, formal and polite. The young man turned, startled. He had clearly not expected anyone else to be there. Hi, do I know you? He asked, his eyes assessing her suit, her professional demeanor. My name is Elara Vance, she said, offering a slight, respectful bow, which he returned. I apologize for the intrusion. I was formerly with the firm that conducted the initial due diligence on this partnership for a third-party investment group. My work is concluded, but I was reviewing my notes last night, and I believe I may have spotted a minor linguistic discrepancy in the final draft of the contract, a matter of nuance in the translation. She chose her words with surgical precision. Linguistic discrepancy. Nuance. These were soft, non-confrontational words that wouldn't set off alarm bells. She was framing her approach not as an accusation, but as a professional courtesy, a fellow specialist pointing out a potential point of ambiguity. Sato's brow furrowed. A discrepancy? Mr. Croft's legal team assured us the translation was a direct mirror of the English. In 99% of the document it is, Elara agreed smoothly. But I have found that sometimes, especially with complex legal terminology, direct translation can alter the implied intent. It is a very subtle point in Clause 4, subsection B, concerning asset management protocols under specific market conditions. It may be nothing at all, but I felt a professional obligation to bring it to your attention. The potential for future misinterpretation, however small, would be regrettable for all parties. She watched his face carefully. He was intelligent and he was cautious. He wasn't dismissing her, but he wasn't convinced either. Which specific characters are you referring to? He asked, his tone shifting from surprise to serious. This was the critical moment. She opened her notebook to a page where she had written the 2 kanji compounds side by side. Zhuanze Quan, Sentakuken, and Yi Wu Gimu. She pointed to them. The use of Gimu here in this context could be interpreted not as Croft having an option to buy, but as Tanaka Holdings having an obligation to sell. As I said, it is a matter of nuance, but the legal ramifications of that nuance are significant. Sato stared at the characters. He took out his own phone, tapped into a file, and his eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He had seen the clause. He understood. The professional calm in his eyes was replaced by a flash of cold fury. He knew instantly that this was no nuance. This was a dagger. He looked up at Ilara, his expression transformed. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a sharp, penetrating respect. He saw her not as a random woman, but as a professional who had just handed him a shield to stop a sword thrust he hadn't even seen coming. "Vance-san," he said, his voice now laced with a steely formality. "You have my deepest gratitude. Can you tell me how you came upon this information?" "Let's just say I am a person who believes that clarity and honor are the cornerstones of any successful partnership," Ilara replied, keeping her answer vague. "I would recommend that Mr. Tanaka have his own legal team in Tokyo review the Japanese text of Clause 4 immediately, before any signing takes place." Sato nodded, his mind clearly working fast. "Tanaka-san must be informed. Thank you." He gave her a deep, formal bow. It was not the bow of a stranger, but a bow of profound respect and gratitude. Ilara simply inclined her head in return. "I wish you and Mr. Tanaka a successful venture." She turned and walked away, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and triumph. The fuse was lit. She had passed the message, delivered the warning. Now all she could do was wait and see if the bomb would be defused, or if it would detonate and take her with it. She walked out of the hotel, melting back into the morning crowds, once again anonymous, her role in the unfolding drama complete. The signing ceremony was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the hotel's grandest boardroom. Ilara was nowhere near the hotel. She was in a small, nondescript coffee shop 3 blocks away, nursing a single cup of black coffee she couldn't taste. Her phone was on the table in front of her, silent. Every nerve in her body was on fire. Had Sato reached Tanaka in time? Had they dismissed her warning as the ramblings of a meddling outsider? Or worse, had they contacted Croft to clarify the issue, revealing her involvement and giving him time to cover his tracks and destroy her? She had played her hand. There was nothing left to do but wait for the fallout. She imagined the scene in the boardroom. Julian Croft, smug and triumphant, his pen hovering over the contract. Mr. Tanaka, calm and inscrutable. Would he stop it? Would he call out the fraud? The uncertainty was agonizing. Meanwhile, back at the hotel, Maria was a wreck. She was trying to manage the morning rush in the main dining room, but her eyes kept darting toward the elevators, toward the executive floor. She knew the signing was happening. She had seen Croft stride through the lobby an hour earlier, looking like a king on his way to his coronation. She felt complicit, terrified, and strangely hopeful all at once. She had taken a risk, trusted Ilara, and now her own fate was tied to the outcome of that high-stakes meeting. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The long table gleamed under the recessed lighting. Julian Croft sat at its head, flanked by his lawyer, Gregory Finch. Across from them sat Mr. Tanaka and his 2 associates. Kaito Sato, the translator, stood discreetly behind his boss. The contract, the same one Ilara had examined, lay open between them. "Well, gentlemen," Croft said, beaming, "a historic day for both our companies. A partnership that will redefine luxury hospitality on a global scale." He uncapped a ridiculously expensive fountain pen. "Shall we make it official?" Mr. Tanaka did not reach for his own pen. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the table before him. He looked at Julian Croft, his gaze level and cold. "Croft-san," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. "Before we proceed, there is a small matter of clarification I require regarding the contract." Croft's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Tanaka-san. Our aim is full transparency. What can we clarify for you?" "It concerns Clause 4, subsection B," Mr. Tanaka continued, his eyes unblinking. "My legal team in Tokyo, after a final overnight review, has raised a concern about the Japanese translation." Gregory Finch paled. He shot a nervous glance at Croft. A concern. I assure you the translation is a verbatim copy. A standard. Please do not insult my intelligence, Finch-san, Mr. Tanaka said, his voice cutting through the lawyer's blustering. He tapped the Japanese side of the document. This text does not describe an option to buy. It describes an obligation to sell. It is a predatory clause designed to strip my company of its assets through fraudulent means. It is an act of profound dishonor. The room fell into a deathly silence. Croft's face had turned a mottled shade of red and white. The mask of the charming CEO had shattered, revealing the cornered rat beneath. There must be some mistake, he stammered, looking helplessly at Finch. A simple translation error. Gregory? Finch began to sweat profusely, his collar suddenly looking 2 sizes too tight. Yes, a regrettable error. A slip of the keyboard. We can have it amended immediately, of course. My deepest apologies. Mr. Tanaka held up a hand, silencing him. There is no error, he said, his voice like chips of ice. This was deliberate. This was an attempt at theft, disguised in legal language. You assumed we would be careless. You assumed we would be fools. You, Croft-san, have mistaken our politeness for weakness. This is a grave miscalculation. He stood up, his associates rising with him. The deal was not just off, it had been poisoned. We will not be entering into any partnership with you, Mr. Tanaka declared. Furthermore, I will be making it my personal mission to inform the international business community of the exact nature of your negotiating tactics. A man who cannot be trusted with his words cannot be trusted with business. Croft leaped to his feet, his face contorted with rage and panic. You can't do this. We have a letter of intent. You'll be in breach. A letter of intent predicated on good faith, which you have spectacularly violated, Mr. Tanaka retorted calmly. Then he turned his gaze to the room at large. There is one more thing. I was alerted to this discrepancy by an individual of remarkable integrity and perception. I am told she was a member of your staff, a waitress whom you publicly humiliated and fired yesterday. I would like to speak with her. Julian Croft froze, the blood draining from his face. He looked as if he had been struck by lightning. The waitress, the stupid, clumsy waitress. It was impossible. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had been undone, not by a corporate rival or a market downturn, but by the invisible, insignificant woman he had tried to break. Bring her to me, Mr. Tanaka commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Panic erupted in the room. Finch was babbling incoherently. Croft was sputtering, trying to formulate a denial, a threat, anything. But it was too late. The gears of his downfall were already in motion. A call was made, and a frantic search for the fired waitress began, sending shockwaves of confusion and rumor throughout the hotel. The call reached Maria in her office. It was from Julian Croft's terrified personal assistant. Find the waitress from yesterday's meeting, the one Mr. Croft let go. Mr. Tanaka is demanding to see her in the main boardroom, now. Maria's heart leapt into her throat. It had happened. Ilara had done it. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial the number. Ilara, it's Maria. You need to come back to the hotel, right now. Mr. Tanaka is asking for you. In the coffee shop, Ilara stood up so quickly she knocked over her chair. It was real. Her gambit had worked. She paid for her coffee and walked, not ran, back toward the lion's den. Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. As she approached the hotel, she saw the ripple effects of the chaos. Staff members were whispering in corners, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. The word was spreading. Something had happened in the boardroom. The Japanese deal was off, and somehow a waitress was at the center of it all. Maria met her at the staff entrance, her eyes wide with a terrified respect. I can't believe you did it, she whispered, handing Ilara a temporary staff ID to get her past security. He's going to lose his mind. He already has, Ilara said calmly. Walking down the corridor to the executive boardroom was the longest walk of Ilara's life. This time, she wasn't a servant. She was a key witness, a giant slayer. When Maria opened the door, all conversation in the room stopped. Every eye turned to her. Mr. Tanaka and his delegation stood on one side, their expressions calm and watchful. On the other side stood Julian Croft and Gregory Finch. Finch looked like he was about to faint. Croft's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. If looks could kill, she would have been incinerated on the spot. Ilara walked into the center of the room, her posture perfect, her gaze steady. She was no longer hiding. Mr. Tanaka stepped forward, offering her a respectful bow. "Vansa-san," he said, his voice clear and resonant. "I owe you a great debt. You have saved my company from entering into a partnership with a man who lacks honor." "I only did what I believed was right, Tanaka-san," Ilara replied, her voice even. Croft finally found his voice, a strangled, furious roar. You're behind this. You schemed, you plotted. You're a disgraced, disbarred lawyer, a fraud. I'll sue you for everything you have, which is nothing. He pointed a trembling finger at her. "Security, get this trespasser out of my hotel." "She is here at my invitation," Mr. Tanaka stated coldly, stopping the two security guards who had stepped forward. He turned his piercing gaze on Croft. "And it seems you have done my research for me. A disgraced lawyer. Perhaps, but a brilliant one, it would appear. One who was sharp enough to see the venom you hid in your contract. One has to wonder what kind of organization would let such a talent go. Or perhaps what kind of organization would create a situation where such a talent is forced to serve tables." The implication was clear. Mr. Tanaka wasn't just defending Ilara. He was turning her past into a testament to her resilience and Croft's ignorance. "This is absurd," Croft bellowed. "She's a nobody. I am Julian Croft." "Your name will mean very little soon," Mr. Tanaka said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The story of your attempted fraud and of the brilliant waitress who exposed you is a very compelling one. I imagine the financial press will be quite interested in it, as will your board of directors." That was the final blow. The board. The whispers of his incompetence would now become a roar. The failed Tanaka deal, coupled with a scandal of this magnitude, was a death sentence for his career. He stared at Ilara, his eyes wide with disbelief and fury. He had built an empire on intimidation, on the belief that he was untouchable. And it had all been brought crashing down by a woman he wouldn't have bothered to remember the name of. He saw his future dissolving before his eyes. The emergency board meeting, the vote of no confidence, the humiliating press releases, the end of his reign. He had lost everything. He opened his mouth to say something, another threat, another insult, but no words came out. There was nothing left to say. He was a king who had been dethroned, and he didn't even know how the peasant had gotten into the castle. He looked small, pathetic, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume on a failed actor. Mr. Tanaka ignored him completely, turning his full attention to Ilara. "Vansa-san," he said, "integrity, intelligence, and courage are qualities my organization values above all others. They are qualities you have demonstrated in abundance. My company is expanding its operations in North America. We require a person with a deep understanding of contract law and a fluency in both our cultures to oversee our legal affairs. The position is head of Trans-Pacific Legal Strategy." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. "The position is yours, if you would like it." Ilara stared at him, stunned. For a moment she couldn't breathe. It wasn't just a job offer, it was vindication. It was a return to the world that had cast her out, not on her knees, but on her own terms, at a level higher than she had ever been before. It was the restoration of her name, her career, her life. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She stood tall, looked past the sputtering, defeated form of Julian Croft, and met Mr. Tanaka's gaze. "Tanaka-san," she said, her voice clear and strong, filled with a power she hadn't felt in years. "I accept." The sun streamed through the boardroom windows, illuminating the dust motes, turning them into diamonds. But this time they weren't fleeting. This time they were real.